Yep. You want to go to the podium?
Well, then we gotta, well, you know what we'll do? We'll just take a break, and then, put the podium on one of those tables and set that up somehow.
Oh, okay. All
When
right.
it's time. Oh, you got that? Perfect.
We put the podium on here.
That sounds great.
So, where do we want it? Over there? Because that'd be a little crowded here with the wires.
Yep, well, we're gonna pull the wires as soon as we get done.
We got all kinds of room over there for good seats.
I don't bite though. I try not to.
I'll tell people if they want to talk. You don't have to sign if they want to talk. Just sign blanks. Right. These are just in case they ever get caught. That works.
That works perfect. Yeah.
No, I'm going to be on the side. You guys.
You only got two tonight?
And then you can just hop out of the way.
Well, I have it on my thermos, so it's still boxed up somewhere.
I'll go ahead and let Kathy get back. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. And you can get on that. Before we call it to order, actually what I'm going to do is just make a quick announcement. What we were hoping to do tonight is if people wanted to come up and talk, we want to keep it orderly and we want to be able to organize people's comments and remember what people talked about kind of in the short time. So if you could take these, if you have the thought that you're going to come up and speak tonight, then if you can just take one of these, fill them out, it would be great. Basically, it just identifies your name, where you live, stuff like that. And then we're going to organize it by voters and landowners. It looks like we have plenty of time tonight. This was kind of set up in a way that we can handle. It was scalable, so we had basically what we were expecting tonight, where we had 100 people show up. Like, I don't know, how many people showed up last night and anything? A lot?
Quite a few.
So if we had a lot, that concept, and we had to kind of limit people, that's what we had these forms for, but it's just good to have a good organized process to do it. So the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and have a pledge to the flag. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So we've already approved the first meeting minutes for January. I just checked those, but we on the 16th of January we got together, we made up the schedule for the spring, and when we got together in February, we never really looked at that. So if you can just take a quick look at those January 16th meeting minutes and tell me if you have any additions or deletions, and then I can sign them all. So I'll hear a motion for the January 16th minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve January 16th minutes.
It's Vernon, Gerald. Okay, all in favor? Okay, take a look at the January 5th minutes, February 5th regular meeting minutes. All these are online anyway, on the month by month, and I've got a kind of a summation of every sub-minute that we've done all through today. Does anybody have any recommendations on February? Again, these have been posted for several months. Here a second.
Second.
Vernon and Bruce, all in favor? Okay. And then please take a look at the March meeting minutes. Now, if you look at the March meeting minutes, underneath the March meeting minutes, what I have done is actually printed off the meeting minutes. I meant them to be printed in landscape mode, so apologize for the fine print. We'll print them in landscape mode to fit into the binder, but these are basically sort of a printout of the entire summation of all the workshops we've had up through last week for the entire spring. So, again, you can look at those for the past couple months too.
I'll make a motion to accept the minutes as written.
Looking for a second.
I'll second it.
Gerald and Bruce, all in favor? Okay. So now get all the meeting. Okay, and next order of business is we do have at the end of April, it's April, right? The terms come to an end. Bill's term and Vern's term need to be, or excuse me, the terms need to be renewed, and Bill has offered his resignation. So I just want to take a moment to express my appreciation to Bill, and this only came about recently. I think he took vacation in Aruba last week, and you can see he's tanned. And one time, way back when I was in Portland, I had a boss. I used to work for a company called Stevens, Morton, Rose, and Thompson. We started this little company, Morton and Rose, over in Newark. It was just a surveyor and an engineer together. And I think one of those people might have worked in the same place that you might have worked one time, Dave, too. So anyway, they worked together, and then they grew into this company with Stevens Architects. And Morton, or Dwayne Rose, he's really laid back, tall, shocking white hair, big white beard. He was a chain smoker, and eventually that got the end of him, but he was really laid back. But he got enough money together over time working at this larger company that they had formed to take regular trips down to St. Martin and Aruba in the spring. And one Monday, he came into the office right after his 2 weeks or 3 weeks that he had taken down in one of the Caribbean islands. And the secretary came down and started hassling him about his timesheet and this and that, and there was like 2 employee issues that had come up or whatever. And he stood right up and said, "I'm done right now." He turned around, got on his computer, wrote a letter of resignation. That day, walked out, never came back. he went to Florida and took up land surveying in Florida, and all he ever wanted to do down there was be a crew chief. And he was perfectly happy holding the rod and running a saw or whatever down in Florida at that age after getting done working for that big company in Portland. So anyway, I'm kind of when Bill I heard about Bill's resignation, it kind of reminded me of that time back when Dwayne did that. So I definitely appreciate it, and I know exactly where you're coming from.
Thank you, Eric.
So what that means is typically, one of the alternates moves up. If they don't want to move up and they want to stay alternates, then we go out and try to get somebody in the community to offer a name up to the select board, and the select board takes care of selecting a new member. But those are basically the processes that we have in place. So if you're an alternate member and you'd like to move up, make that known to the select board, and if you don't want to do it, make that also known to the select board, and then they'll find somebody else. And meanwhile, please continue to show up at the meeting, because we need you to make sure we have quorums and good stuff like that. So, trying to get us back on track. Before we get into the actual hearing part, also, I don't know if people noticed, we have, Bruce had written up a pretty succinct overview of what we're doing, so you can actually, this is a take home for everybody. So you should be able to, and this kind of is not exactly the same as these slides, which are going to be posted online as well, but it does kind of give you a nice overview. So what I thought I'd start off with, though, before we got into the actual hearing part and hear from you, I thought that I would run through some slides here. All right. And sign-up sheets too, if anybody needs them. So go ahead, Dave, if you would, and next slide, please. Just as fast as the Microsoft mouse can run. Oh no, the mouse in my kitchen runs faster.
Bear with me.
I know, actually, I saw you flipping through them, so I know it works.
Bear with me again.
Here we go. Well, is the mouse working?
Shifting here.
Oh. Yeah, like a second. We used to call that the blue screen of death. Still is.
Yeah.
Still is. It says off. Now we get it back on. Apologize.
I'm sorry. So, you should go hit the menu button.
It's, camera, computer's working fine. Okay. Hit enter, is there an enter switch?
Yeah. Is there a USB port on this side? No, there's not. See one. Try the other. Yeah, just try a different USB port.
Did a presentation last night, had it all set up, everything was working. My wife's like, you gotta put it
We
over
can
there.
try that VGA wire.
So I moved it over there.
I don't know why it doesn't like this USB
Did I
wire.
get that thing to work again? Right here. Follow later.
That was the way.
I never unplugged anything.
I don't know,
An outlet
does
from
this
the
have
wall.
HDMI output?
Yeah.
Yes, it does.
Maybe we can get an HDMI cable where I can try that sometime.
She thinks, oh, she's going to leave her car wrong.
That's coming.
Just remember to do it before.
No, it's not gonna be done. Hit the keys. I think the keys have been lost. I don't think the keys.
Okay, it has it.
It's on this side, right?
I didn't bring them over.
Mine?
I don't think it was.
They should be.
She's told me she's been calling.
How's everyone?
There.
And then when she talks to me about it, oh, I haven't fallen for a I was just down there at 2 a.m. This little guy.
We were at the Eddington Holding Board meeting last Thursday night. Till midnight.
There's a here, right here. This looks like there's something.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was like 11 o'clock.
We can try that out later. He's got it
I
going.
got called at 2 a.m. a few hours later for the second roll.
I see. It's funny because I'm just thinking.
So pretty much just, I kind of just want to give everybody a little idea of where we were like in 2000 and kind of what happened over the past 10 years roughly. So we did grow in population a little bit, you know, maybe give or take 200 people. The number of households increased a little bit, and the number of families increased a little bit. And then the households with children, you know, also just increased just a little bit. So obviously, you know, with the kids coming into the area, you know, we know that contributes to the school district and keeping that populated as well. Sometime we should look into what Eddington and Holden are like. We want to look at the school down the road as part of like some sort of a strategic planning process. But this is kind of what happened over the 10 previous years. Next slide, please. So this data all came from the census website. So they're saying that rents in town, about a fifth of the people in town rent. And the rents, that's what the rents are. And about a third of the population pays mortgages in this kind of, I guess, upper middle range. There's very few people that pay more than that. And then there's a whole ton of people that pay less than that. But I just wanted to give you an idea for, where the big block of stuff is, where you can kind of expect to get your revenue from. And amazingly enough, 90% of the people in town drive to work alone, that we don't really commute from out here. And 40% drive 30 to 40 minutes one way, so I'm guessing it's probably mostly Bangor and Brewer, but it could be up into Old Town or no type of area. But and I know we have people who work at home, so I kind of thought, that kind of does stray the statistics a little bit, Bruce. Because Bruce works out of his house, and I know a lot of people do work out of their house. But I just thought it was interesting that the census, data didn't grab anybody working out of their house, and we all know quite a few people do work out of their house, and we want to try to encourage that in town as well. So next slide, please. So what we did for the ordinance, sometime, and really it started getting worked on even earlier than 2006. It was a bit of a project because it kind of came as a child of the comprehensive plan that a variety of people worked on. Paula actually is probably the continuity hub for quite a bit of it through there, and she spent quite a bit of time on it, and really, in Bruce's writing, he kind of really brought that out even more. That was a huge change, and like right now, we're looking at the ordinance and I'm working on it. Everything is so tethered together in the ordinance, and I remember at the time that I was a big proponent of that. With Paula, Rick wasn't too keen on the idea. He thought it was a bad idea because nobody else really in the area does it, but it does sort of, integrate in a comprehensive way, the planning process. And Paula is a planner, and that's how it came out. And I tend to be a little bit like that too. We always may not agree on the outcomes, but on the procedural perspective, we tend to have probably a lot of agreement. So then, in 2009, we had a product, and I remember we worked on it, and right before the town meeting, we had a bunch of public hearings, something like this, and there were some people sitting in the back of the room. I think one of them's name might have been Bruce Jellison, and he basically ripped it to shreds, and then a number of people were behind that also, because they felt that we had overplanned, and we had something that was more fitting for Bangor than it was, or even a larger city than it was for Clifton. And so we came to the public meeting in 2009, and the planning board actually recommended the town vote no, which they did. And then after that, we spent like another whole year working on it. In the middle of that, the Pisgah Mountain project kind of came into play. So then we had to, in the middle of trying to address all these new procedures, to integrate all the old ordinances, to come up with new processes, to have some sort of zoning that we've never really had before, all that stuff. And the Pisgah Mountain project, it was like a mammoth project that took all the way into the next year. We missed the town meeting, and we ended up getting it approved finally after a lot of discussion in town at the June meeting. So that's kind of how we did it. And we had a little revision in March of 2011. So in a nutshell, that's what happened for us historically. Next slide, please. So this kind of gives you the idea of where we are. We tried to, in this one, we tried to renumber the thing, and actually, again, this is, I'll take responsibility for having it messed up a little bit. Paula had originally started to number it kind of like we numbered it now, and then I told Paula it was too complicated and we shouldn't do it that way, and I wasn't really thinking ahead very far. And then I thought, try to keep the little older style look with the old, if you look in old regulations, they're always, the standard outline form with the Roman numerals and that big letter A and then the numbers and the little letter A and all that stuff. That's how it always was done in the past. And, for some reason I thought that would be a good idea, and it was not a good idea. And then it was really hard to keep track of. We ended up with double letters and things like that. and stuff that was missed is too hard to keep track of. So anyway, even though Paul did a lot of typing, I spent time over at Paul's house working on it with it, stuff like that. You know, I'll take at least partial responsibility for having those things messed up. So we're trying to fix it now numerically and make it so you can follow it. The other thing was if you look through the projects, we do kind of pick and choose who we quote unquote pick on. So one of the things we did decide, though, it is hard, you know, after looking at the Pisgah Mountain project, we realized it is hard to do analysis on a big project. So what we did is a lot of the standards that were kind of targeted towards wind development, we actually backed those into all the, what we call those tier 3 large projects. So anything that's sort of a super project, you know, there are a lot of requirements on, a lot of hearing requirements, a lot of review things, and opportunities for interveners and things like that. So that's what we did. But we also loosened up requirements for small businesses and home businesses because it seemed like after looking at some things that came in, a fellow came in with a little project with 4 little, basically 1-bedroom camps with wood stoves in them. You know, and he couldn't meet the basic requirements. He's just running the business out of his house and wanted to give pony rides and have birthday parties. And the way the ordinance was written, it made it appear as if he was going to do a condominium project or something. So we're trying to thin that out a little bit. With the wind energy standards back then, I mean, it's kind of interesting. You look at it back then. You know, if you look at the amount of documents that have been produced in 2009, 2010, we were looking at documents that were produced from 2000 through 2006, 2007. You know, now I think that, you know, in the past 4 or 5 years, there's been at least 2 or 3 times that many documents produced. So there's a lot more information to work from, and there's a lot more wind turbines all over the world. So we've tried to integrate newer standards, and in many cases we've gotten, you know, more conservative, you know, for some of those standards. And also the public participation thing, again, that shined its head up under the Pisgah Mountain project. People came in and said, you know, we had a couple of groups. We'd never had a group before. We had the Clifton Task Force on Wind. We had joiners, everything else. And we didn't really have a clear, clean-cut procedure for it. So basically, you know, I thought that we should have a procedure for something like that, because even though, you know, it was a little bit of a painful process to go through, I definitely felt for people who wanted to present themselves, because we didn't really have a good format for it. So that's another thing that we touched up. Next slide, please. So kind of this is our overall philosophy. You know, some people may or may not agree with it, but, you know, I reread actually the first couple of pages in Article 1 that Paula had written up, and it talks a lot about fairness and comprehensiveness, because, you know, after I read this a couple times, you know, I thought maybe this was a little too harsh in some regards, but really, you know, this particular board, you know, we do believe in people's property rights. We believe people own property and they should be able to develop it, but there should be, you know, reasonable regulations. But you shouldn't be regulations because you shouldn't pick and choose the businesses, you know, that you like and don't like based on the board or a few people and then let them in, you know, or make rules to prevent certain things. If it's a legal business in the United States, a legal business in Maine, you know, you can regulate it properly. You know, probably you should be thinking about how you can regulate it and don't make something because it suits your personal preference. So we try to be as neutral in the middle as possible. So that's what these, I guess, philosophies are about. So next slide, please. So we've had weekly workshops since January. We have had some support from the sound consultant Dave Hessler from Virginia. Those are the websites. The citizens, I think Jess has been posting videos at this other website that you can go look at. I think there's select board meetings there as well. But if you want to look at those, we're trying to get it set up so that we can have a link into, you know, the videos that either Rick or Dave can make from these meetings. We haven't quite gotten there technology-wise. You can see that we're maybe a little technology handicapped as a little group in some regards. We can work on that. Everybody has areas to improve. So next slide, please. So we got comments, and as I was going through different documents in the past couple ones, one thing I stumbled across was this thing from out in Oregon where they took public comments, and actually it was about wind turbines. But, you know, it's pretty interesting to look at. I was more interested in the process that they used, and I realized looking at that we didn't really come up with an exact process for how we should rate different people's comments, but sort of intuitively, we gravitated to this, and this came right from that guide, you know, and it does seem like a reasonable approach to, you know, where you should weigh documents and how you should take in information and how you should grade that information in terms of a regulatory perspective. Next slide, please. So this is just a quick summary of the updates. The intervener section I got from Vermont. Vermont is a sister state to us. They do a lot of public interaction in Vermont over a lot of things. And so I studied that Vermont process. It's like a huge process for their big projects. And so I didn't take the exact thing, but it was really closely mimics that Vermont process they use for taking public input. So if we can get this through, we'll be able to have, it'll be easy for people to see how to fit in, and it makes the planning board go through a process to evaluate interveners and bring them into the fold and all that. So I think that's actually a good thing for dealing with these larger projects, you know, as they come in, you know, or if they come in the future. We expanded the violation responsibility to include contractors. Right now, it's not clear if somebody comes on your property who's responsible, and sometimes, you know, we all know, especially in shoreline zones, you know, a contractor comes in and the contractor says, the landowner told me to do such and such. And the landowner says, no, I never said any such thing. And it puts the code enforcement officer in a bit of a bind. So now what we're going to do is we're going to say it doesn't really matter, you know, the contractor, landowner, we don't care, we're going to bring you all in, and whatever the fine is for whatever it is that you did, if you're found guilty, you all figure out how to pay for it, but you're all going to be accountable for it. We expanded the tables in Article 6. They were kind of hard to follow. We hope we made the standards a lot easier to follow so there can be a checklist. The word environmental impact statement is something out of a federal law. That was not intentional, so we changed it to a comprehensive impact statement so that, you know, there wasn't confusion, because some of that did come up as far as the commentary, you know, from interested parties regarding that Pisgah Mountain project, and I wanted to ensure in the future that there was not confusion about confusion. There's a Clifton standard to meet, not a federal 40 CFR standard to meet. Next slide, please. So we created a waiver process to make it clear. It was kind of very loosely in there before and not laid out exactly how that worked. It wasn't well documented, and now the new process, you know, essentially allows what the old process did, but it lays it out step by step and enforces the board if a waiver is actually given for a submission requirement, not a standard that you have to meet, but just a submission that you, it has to be well documented, signed off, voted on, etc. There has been some discussion about confidentiality and things like that. I know there was a little bit of an effort to make like an ethics part built into the planning board ordinance. We didn't feel that it was necessary to write an ethics policy inside the land use ordinance. We felt it should be a Clifton town thing, so that's what the town of Clifton's working on. The select board's working on an ethics process, you know, and if it's adopted, the whole town will adopt it, all the boards, and everybody will be signed into that one single ethics process. But that being said, you know, there has been a lot of discussion about what is confidential and what's not, and I knew that there was a confidentiality law, but I didn't know exactly what it is. So I've gone through a research that there is a confidentiality law, and it applies to certain people, and now it's written in there into the ordinance that it clearly defines, you know, who can be spoken to confidentially and who can't be spoken to confidentially. And it specifically deletes the planning board, you know, and makes it unambiguous that the planning board has no role in economic development. So I feel that that is another important step. It doesn't address maybe every aspect of the ethics issue, but it really, it spearheads I think, the crux of the issue. We also clarified the definition of what pre-development conferences are, and we had added on additional time to protect property owners. Over the years throughout Maine, in the history of Maine, there's a lot of opportunities. Spite wells are the most common thing. It used to be people would do spite wells on shorefront lots all the time. There'd be a couple of vacant lots, somebody would move in, they'd find out that somebody else was going to build a camp who'd owned that land for 20 years, and they'd build a spite well, okay, right next to the property line, so the person would have a hard time getting a septic system on their lot. I mean, Rick probably used to deal with that all the time before they made rules about stuff like that. You know, and there are things, you know, a person comes in, the process that we had in place for getting a project up to the point where it could be, reasonably complete, it could take, 2 or 3 meetings, for a really complicated project. Well, technically, under the Maine state law, the default condition is, that somebody else can go, oh, well, I didn't know that my neighbor was going to do this, I'm going to go do that because I don't like my neighbor or I don't like what they're doing or whatever, and then they can start doing things. And we didn't feel that that's appropriate. So what we're doing is we built a protection in for a property owner. If they have a project, they want to do a project, they have like 120 days. They can come in, they say, I'm going to do this project. Then they've got 120 days to get all their stuff together and get it in. If they don't get it in 120 days, then that's just the way it is. They owe all the fees up front. All the fees are non-refundable. So, there is some skin in the game. It's not just to come in and drop a piece of paper off, but it provides some reasonable protection for property owners, and takes the town out of having to be a referee for these things between landowners, which I don't really think the planning board or the select board needs to be a referee between disputing property owners for these things. So it takes that out of the game. Next slide, please. So we also expanded the public hearing process. Before, when we made the public hearing process, I know that Bruce and I and Bill, we were strong advocates of making sure that things hummed right along, because we were so concerned, that planning boards were going to drag their heels on things and drag projects out. But, when we started to do the calculations and the math and meet the submission requirements and things like that, it put too much pressure on the planning board, and too much pressure on the applicant, and too much pressure on the interveners, and made a process that wasn't comfortable for anybody. So we've expanded those timeframes out to enable everybody to have an opportunity to do their thing and be more comfortable that nobody's going to quote unquote break any time windows. So now people can deal with things in a little bit more reasonable and rational way without feeling those pressures. And the intervener thing I talked about a little while ago, because sometimes what ends up happening is, you're in the middle of looking things over from a planning board, and then you find out something new, or you ask the developer something, and you get new information from the developer. Well, I wanted to ensure that if we got new information from the developer, that whoever the interested parties were would have an opportunity to, dispute or respond to that information. So, that is all clear. It's not ambiguous anymore. So if the process, it goes back and forth, and there's actual solid closure for projects. So that's added into the system. Next slide, please. So we also ensured that the board was empowered to put additional conditions on the project if it's approved. It's kind of assumed that you can do that, but we want to make sure it was clear. We also, realize that sometimes things can go to court for a while. And we put in a mechanism for that, even though the mechanism kind of exists the way it is now. Again, it's kind of like so many other things. It's in there, but it's not really clear that it's in there. So we've just cleared that up. We used to have a site, if you did a site plan, if you wanted to build a gas station, you had to meet all the state statutory requirements for subdivisions. Again, that was my bad idea. Because it just seemed like it would be easy to do and make everything consistent, but it's not a good idea. So that's been taken out, and that was, again, I'll take responsibility for that. I encourage Paul to do it. So we've clarified the state law that multifamily housing can be approved under local site plan review and not subdivision review. If you don't actually put this in your ordinance, you have to make the whole project go through a subdivision review as if it's house lots, and the house lot standards just don't match up for multifamily housing. So basically, if you wanted to build, kind of in the best case, you want to build a four-unit elderly housing complex. If you don't write this into your ordinance, you have to go through the whole subdivision process and not a site plan, even though you have 4 units under one roof. So the state law says if you have a site plan process that's as comprehensive as a subdivision process, you can substitute your site plan process. So that's kind of what that's targeting, to enable people to be able to come in and build these smaller projects. Next slide, please. So we updated the sign part. Obviously, you drive around any part of the United States now, and even this region, a lot of people are using illuminated signs. We don't let people do that now. Now we're going to let people do that because that, it's just one of those things that happens. It's the 21st century, and this is what technology brings us. So we're there. We also try to make it easier to go and have a bed and breakfast home occupation with a code enforcement officer approval instead of having to send it to the planning board. We've modified the tier impact assessment process. This tier impact assessment process is something that we dreamed up as a planning board before, really kind of to help the planning board get an idea for what the scope and scale of a project is. No other town has it, and it is a little bit cumbersome, but if you have an inexperienced planning board, it does help the planning board to kind of shape in, how you need to look at a project, and it does help the code enforcement officer kind of navigate somebody through it, and it gives somebody a better idea for a scope and scale. So it is kind of maybe a little bit of an advanced thing for Clifton, and maybe not necessary right now, but it's something that I think is good to have in there and can be learned to be usable and make it easier for people actually. We've expanded the definitions for all the different types of structures. We've had dwellings and housings and units and all kinds of stuff like that. Every name you could think of for a house we had, and we consolidated all that into the definitions in the back. Next slide, please. And we've expanded the allowed uses for various zones in town and made it more clear. Really specific things to promote in terms of recreational development, things like that we want to target. So we've done that. We've provided definitions for different types of development, made it really clear about that. The wind energy standards are completely rewritten. Like I said, all the definitions are moved into Article 8. And we've clarified and consolidated definitions for dwellings, occupied structures. Okay, I mentioned that a second ago. Next slide, please. Coming down to the end here. So that's the website you can go to. I don't want to take a lot of time for questions, but we don't really have a huge crowd here tonight, so I would entertain just a couple of quick questions. If somebody wanted to ask a couple quick questions, we could before we could actually go into the hearing phase. Going once, going twice. All right. Then we're going to go ahead and shut that down. We'll roll this up. So, if you want to talk tonight, again, please fill out one of these forms, pass it forward, and we'll set you up. I mean, we were going to have like a 5-minute limit. I mean, we'd probably go a little bit longer than 5 minutes if we don't have a lot of speakers. Right now, we've only got 1, 2, we only got 4 people signed up to talk. So if we have more people signed up to talk, we're happy to hear from more people. I want to talk about wind energy. Okay. John Miller told me he didn't want to go first. Dan Oliver, you want to go first?
Certainly. Well, as you said, I'm Dan Oliver, live up here in Clifton, local plumbing. And what we have here is, let me get the wording right. Anyway, they have a petition to the planning board to change some ordinances around here. Let me see if I can pass this out properly. I believe that's for you. Everybody gets a copy of this, and now. Need a copy back there with the public? Yeah. So, quite simple. I'm just going to read this verbatim. The planning board did an excellent job with the wind farm part of the Clifton land use ordinance last year. Like most complex documents, it is an ever-changing, ever-improving set of rules. The board is currently correcting some of the technical flaws that hindered Pisgah Mountain LLC from building a wind farm. These technical flaws in the ordinance stopped him, not because the wind farm would be too close to homes, but because of requirements in the ordinance that are physically impossible to meet. The planning board is correcting these flaws, but that will be a fruitless exercise unless those changes are applied to his project. I think this is wrong. We as a town can vote to apply these corrections to Mr. Fuller's project. If you agree, please sign this petition, which we just turned in. Whereas the Penobscot County Superior Court rescinded the planning board approval of the Pisgah Mountain Wind Turbine Project for the following reasons. The planning board should not have ruled on the feasibility of the ordinance requirement to have the developer create an ISO contour map, despite the fact that the independent sound consultant from Virginia indicated it was physically and scientifically impossible. 2, the planning board did not use the right factor in determining the normal sound level and the low frequency sound level differential. Despite the fact the judge did not let the planning board make use of the advice of the independent consultant during the remand process, and the standard should not have been in the ordinance in the first place because it was made for gas turbines, not wind turbines. Whereas the planning board is considering deleting these requirements, whereas the state of Maine allows this type of action by a legislative body, we the undersigned are requesting the planning board investigate making the deletion of these two standards retroactive to the date of the original wind ordinance passed. And he has the copies thereof.
You guys get that?
Close enough?
Oh, all right.
Clear enough?
Yep. Anything else? All right, thanks.
You've got the request there for the changes, that's what we're in for.
Okay. Let me click this to that. John, you ready to go yet?
No, but I will.
I was going to prepare a speech, but I was busy last night. Good evening. Thank you for allowing me to speak. My name is John Williams. I've lived in Clifton for over 44 years. I've owned land in Clifton for 31 years. My grandfather gave me my first piece of land in Clifton when I was 13. Probably a lot of people here tonight are here about wind. I'm actually here about the ordinance. I just jotted down a few things here quick, and it probably should have come in the question part of this. Does our ordinance cover if I wanted to bring a gas line into town and build some gas turbines? Does our ordinance cover that?
I think
Is
so.
there a section in there that would cover something, a project like that? Like right across the river? Easy?
Don't know. I think it is.
The next question, we got a local Eddington nearby here. Is there something in there that covers quarries? Like if we wanted to remove a mountaintop, like say Nickerson Hill near Park Pond. Setbacks are there, is that something that our ordinance would be able to cover something like that and be able to either permit it or deny it based on what's written? The third issue is a dance hall with a bar in it. We actually have a quote-unquote dance hall in Clifton currently.